So hello, we're gonna bust through these slides so fast, it's gonna be incredible, light speed. So, okay, we'll start with a couple of preliminary remarks just to get these out of the way. So one thing to keep in mind is that what I'm gonna present is just one way to reconstruct the progression of dance norms in the 20th century. I'm just focusing on the US context and just the 20th century. I'm just focusing on concert dance, and I'm just focusing on dance duets, because these are the most salient for my project. And I'm relying on this analogy between movement and pleasure in the following way. So I contend that dance and sex are two different species of bodily encounter, individuated by their purpose, where the purpose of dance is the exploration and expression of bodily movement, and the purpose of sex is the exploration and expression of bodily pleasure. Okay, those things out of the way, what am I going to argue? So my thesis is that the progression of dance norms through the 20th century models a radical revision of sexual norms that would be sufficient to achieve feminist sexual liberation. You might be asking, why does this matter? You might be thinking like, yeah, we're all on board with feminist sexual liberation. We've already got all kinds of norms articulated. We're working towards them. What is this adding, right? So my idea is that it's important for two reasons. The first is that it provides a proof of concept. So it shows we can point to this concrete community with these shared values, and we can show how those shared values consistently produce liberated bodily encounters between different agents. And the second thing is that it demonstrates how all of the different liberatory norms or liberatory projects can work together in a single harmonious system. Okay, overview of the argument. So I'm going to present a three-stage progression of dance norms, where the transition from stage 1 to stage 2 increases the safety and subjectivity of female dancers, and the transition from stage 2 to stage 3 produces this equal subjectivity of female and male dancers. Stages 1 and 2 model current sexual norms, so sexual norms that are currently practiced, where stage 1 models hegemonic norms and stage 2 models progressive norms. And then stage 3 models aspirational sexual norms. So these are things that are not currently in practice or are only in practice in certain limited queer spaces, probably. Yeah. So these are the liberatory norms that will be sufficient for sexual liberation. Okay. The three stages, just to get them out there, classical ballet is stage 1. Stage 2 is going to be post-war modern dance. Stage 3 is going to be contact improvisation. And for each stage, I'll just briefly say something about the compositional values, modeling sexual norms. Okay, stage 1, classical ballet. So classical ballet gets codified in the 19th century. It starts several centuries before then, but gets codified in the 19th. And the duet form is the pas de deux. Ballet training has this strictly gendered movement vocabulary. So male dancers are trained for strength and stability. They do big jumps like this lovely dancer is demonstrating on the slide. Female dancers are trained for flexibility and agility, like this beautiful penché that we see. Yeah. The compositional values, ballet duets tell stories, right? They presume heterosexuality. They're always danced between one male and one female. They exaggerate this idealized sexual dimorphism in the casting and costuming. The male is always taller, larger, and more muscular than the female. The female is always light, slender, and fragile looking. So ballet duets present this symmetry as beauty and this bodily virtuosity. They emphasize lines and predetermined shapes such that the bodies need to fit to the technique. So we have to sort of break down like the actual biomechanics of bodies and make them fit to ballet technique. And there's a predetermined structure to ballet duets. So there's no autonomy for the dancers, no authorship for the dancers. So here's a little example that we're going to watch real quick. Make sure the volume is where I want it. And I'm going to be reading a little thing I wrote, leaning on Cynthia J. Novak's Sharing the Dance and Susan Lee Foster's The Ballerina's Phallic Point while we watch this video. Oh, clicking. So we can see that the male dancer guides, supports, carries, and manipulates the female dancer. He is solid, stable, and strong, while she is pliant, quivering with responsiveness, ready to be guided anywhere. Both dancers are represented as desiring one another, but their expressions of desire are unequal. He is a subject who pursues her as the object of his desire. He runs toward her with outstretched arms, initiates physical contact, and physically controls their bodily encounter. She, on the other hand, is compelled toward him with arms trailing behind, and often resists his advances, only to eventually give in. His longing overwhelms in magnitude and intensity any reciprocal gestures she might proffer. So we can see this resisting, turns her back. I know you're in suspense, but we have to move on. We don't have time. Okay, so this type of dance form is modeling hegemonic sexual norms. So several feminist philosophers have articulated this kind of idea about hegemonic norms. We're going to bust through a few of them. So Gail Rubin has this discussion of the acculturation of children and the traffic in women. She says that male children are acculturated to actively desire and pursue sexual stimulation, whereas female children are acculturated to repress their erotic desires and accept a passive role in sexuality. This process, she says, robs female children of their sexual subjectivity, and she calls for the restoration of that sexual subjectivity. Okay, Rubin's analysis vibes with and sets the stage for Catherine McKinnon, who explains that gender socialization is the process through which women come to identify themselves as sexual beings, as beings that exist for men, specifically for male sexual use. And she says that this gives us this slew of attributes that we see, that we expect to see in adult women, that they're passive, vulnerable, weak, childlike, incompetent, and masochistic. And we can see all of these attributes modeled in the ballerina, right? She must always appear frail and delicate, even when she's performing these virtuosic movements. She's consistently requiring her partner's support and guidance. She subjects her in point shoes, and she's always available not only for her partner's sexualized physical use, but also for the audience's sexualized visual consumption. As Foster says in The Ballerina's Phallic Point, the whole organization of balletic spectacle presumes the primacy of the male heterosexual viewer, whose eyes would be satisfied by a display of voluptuous feminine forms. So this reveals a resonance between balletic performance and pornography, as it's characterized by Nancy Bauer in How to Do Things with Pornography. So Bauer says, or no, Bauer doesn't say this, I say this. So both ballet and porn sexually objectify women for heterosexual male consumption. Both present women as complicit in their own objectification. And crucially, both present objectifying bodily encounters as resulting in happy endings for both the male and the female. In porn, everybody orgasms. In ballet, everybody does beautiful movement, despite the relative lack of autonomy of the females in these bodily encounters. So Bauer's solution is to emphasize communication before, during, and after sex regarding consent, pleasure, and expectations. And we can see those norms that Bauer is looking for modeled in stage 2. So post-war modern dance develops after World War II in the 50s and 60s. It builds on early modern dance, which develops in the 20s and 30s to break away from ballet. So the compositional values we're looking at here, we're not telling stories, we're just focused on the movement. We don't presume heteronormativity. There are male duets, female duets. There's this gender neutral vocabulary, so a lot like movement vocabulary. So a lot of times male and female dancers are trained in the same types of movements. They perform the same types of movements on stage. And the costuming is very stripped down to where it's not exaggerating sexual dimorphism. This kind of composition emphasizes the experience over the appearance of the movement, so what it feels like. There's this emphasis on biomechanical efficiency, such that the technique needs to fit the bodies, as opposed to in ballet, we saw that the bodies need to fit the technique. And there's no predetermined structure, which leads to collaborative composition between the composer and the dancers. So there's a lot of communication regarding what feels good, what feels easy to the dancers' bodies. A lot of times, this collaborative composition emphasizes the personal capabilities and movement affinities of the individual dancers who are making the duet with the composer. However, it falls short. The progressive nature of post-war modern doesn't do what it needs to do because everyone involved in the production of post-war modern dance is trained in ballet. So this balletic training and the internalized expectations regarding what's easy, what makes sense to do, what roles people should fill, these get in the way of the values. There's this residual gendering. We see males lifting females most of the time. We see males initiating movements most of the time. And the female dancers are, so then we see that the female dancers are still physically subordinated to the male dancers, albeit in ways that are less absolute and more consensual. So here's an example, a quick example of a post-war modern duet. So we can see immediately that the costumes, they're basically wearing the exact same things, just low unitards. Here they're doing this counterbalance thing where they're sharing weight, which is very egalitarian, but then they move back into this sort of balletic mode of the male manipulating the female dancer's body and taking her weight. It's also pretty weird, which is great. And we can see this sort of like agendered vocabulary here where they're doing the same types of movements. Okay, so this form of dance is, according to me, modeling progressive sexual norms. So there's this emphasis on communication per Bauer's suggestion, where the increased communication regarding consent makes sex safer for women. The increased communication regarding pleasure makes sex more fulfilling for women. And the increased communication regarding expectations makes sexual encounters more realistic. But just like the dance norms, there's this residual sexual subordination resulting from this lingering heteronormativity, right? So Amiya Srinivasan in The Right to Sex talks about these internalized expectations such that even when men and women are having sexual encounters and the male isn't exhibiting any kind of overt pressure, right? A lot of times women have these internalized expectations regarding the completion of the sexual act, the satisfaction of male desire, and that causes the women to feel pressured in sexual encounters, even when there's no overt pressure being exerted. Srinivasan suggests that we reinvigorate the sexual imagination rather than attempting to fit our sexual experiences to pre-existing expectations. And I'm like, hell yeah. But so yeah, so we can see, like the dance norms that model them, these progressive sexual norms are ultimately insufficient for the liberation of women. Okay, what's that liberation going to take is the question. So I say it's going to take 5 things at least. So Bauer's communication. McKinnon has this commitment to robust mutuality rather than consent as the line between rape and like permissible sexual acts, right? I see nodding, this is good. So yeah, that's in Method and Politics. It's going to, in order to get the robust mutuality where both partners are fully invested in the sexual interaction, we need to accomplish Rubin's call for restoration of female sexual subjectivity. We're going to need Srinivasan's reinvigoration of the sexual imagination. And more than that, to counter heteronormativity, we're going to need, I say, Susan Sontag's radical anti-heteronormativity, where she presents heteronormativity as the source of hegemonic expectations regarding sex roles. So we need to decouple sex bodies from sex roles as well as from gender roles by normalizing androgyny and bisexuality. Okay, we can see dance analogs of all 5 of these goals present in the compositional values of contact improvisation, which is where we're going now. This is the end. Hopefully there's time for all of this. Okay, so stage 3, contact improvisation. This is a form of postmodern dance, starts in the 1960s in the Judson Church Dance Theater. Okay, so this is this definition that I've made up of contact improvisation. So contact improvisation can be understood as a spontaneous mutual investigation of the movement possibilities created by the shifting physical circumstances of 2 bodies in contact. The genders of these 2 bodies are entirely irrelevant. Contact improvisation has no gendered codification of movement vocabulary. And each dancer in the duet, male or female, must be ready to give or take weight, to support, to resist, or to yield, as called for by the interaction. Because the technique in contact improvisation depends on sensing momentum and changing from active to passive weight at the right moments, smaller dancers can easily lift larger partners. A large person who knows how to move his or her weight may seem much lighter than a small person who does not. Okay, so there's going to be a video, don't be scared. So what are the compositional values of contact improv? We've got informality and spontaneity, this heavy de-emphasis on the appearance of the dance, and a commensurately heavy emphasis on the experience. So dancers are trained to maintain an internal focus rather than gazing out in the audience, and to maintain this absorption in the sensation of the movements. Dancers exhibit this sensitivity to momentum, gravity, biomechanical efficiency, and physical touch, which also grounds the accomplishment of the compositional values. And the main thing that we're looking for in contact improv duets, the main value is losing the lead. So we can describe losing the lead as this thing that happens when neither dancer in the duet feels like they're leading and neither feels like they're following. When both dancers are mutually allowing the point of contact and momentum to inform the direction of the movement and the forms of weight sharing that arise, such that each individual dancer observes her own body's movement from one configuration to the next. Okay, so in order to accomplish this particularly the losing the lead phenomenon, we need a few things. We need verbal communication before duets so that partners can share their past experiences, discuss injuries and different preferences with respect to movement. We need verbal communication after the duet so that they can discuss opportunities to better embody the compositional values. But crucially, there can be no verbal communication during the unfolding of the duet. It requires this fast pace, right, and this internal focus that preclude verbal communication throughout the duet. So we have to rely on bodily communication. This involves attending to our partner's movements, momentum, and the responsiveness of their body, and regarding our partners, crucially, as subjects that are equally important to ourselves. Okay, so let's watch a little video, and I'll read a little description of this losing the lead thing while we watch it, and then we'll finish up. So here you'll notice that each dancer maintains the goal of exploring their own bodily movement while allowing that exploration to be both facilitated and constrained by their partner's analogous exploration. Facilitated insofar as their partner's movement creates new opportunities for exploration, and constrained insofar as their partner's movement closes off would-be opportunities for exploration. Allowing their own movement possibilities to be shaped in this way by their partner's exploration requires each dancer to relinquish some of their own autonomy for the sake of their partners. And they do this with the understanding that their partner will do the same. This allows the two dancers to meet one another as genuine equals and engage in a robustly mutual exploration of the possibilities of movement between their bodies. We saw that both of them lifted each other, right? They were just flowing, going through this whole thing. Yeah, robust, mutual, fantastic. Okay, so according to me, contact improvisation models these 6 liberatory sexual norms, and this is the end of the presentation. Okay, so first, it demands that we regard our partners as equal subjects whose exploration of pleasure is equally important to our own. You have to conceive of the goal of sexual encounters as an exploration of your own pleasure, where that exploration is both facilitated and constrained by your partner's analogous exploration of their pleasure. We're noticing, right, this analogy between movement and pleasure that brings the whole thing together. The third one is that you have to regard all adult bodies, regardless of sex, gender, shape, size, color, etc., as neutral enactors of sexual pleasure. This is from Cynthia Novak, describing bodies as neutral enactors of movement, right? So neutral enactors of sexual pleasure, and therefore as potential sex partners, that is potential collaborators in the mutual exploration of sexual pleasure. So from 1, we get Rubin's restoration of female sexual subjectivity. From 1 and 2 together, we get McKinnon's robust mutuality. From 2 and 3 together, we get Srinivasan's reinvigoration of the sexual imagination. And from 3, we get Sontag's radical anti-heteronormativity. Last norms. You have to communicate verbally with your partner before each sexual encounter in order to share past experiences, raise any issues regarding communicable diseases or injuries, and discuss preferences. Attend to your partner, the movements and physical responsiveness of your partner's body, and allow that the information provided by your partner's body with respect to whether a particular position, movement, or instance of touch is pleasurable and easy to guide you and shape your possibilities for exploring pleasure. And communicate verbally with your partner after each sexual encounter in order to discuss opportunities to increase pleasure and better embody these norms. So from 4, 5, and 6, we get Bauer's communication before, during, and after sexual encounters. Okay, wrapping up. I've just presented to you a 3-stage progression of dance norms and an analogous 3-stage progression of sexual norms. Stage 3 of each exemplifies the liberatory norms that we need for feminist liberation. This is already done restrictedly in the realm of dance and needs to be done with these liberatory norms such that they form a community with shared values that consistently produce liberated sexual encounters. As I said earlier, this is important because it provides a proof of concept for feminist sexual liberation and demonstrates how all the liberatory norms can work together in a single harmonious system. That's it. Thank you.